Blood trickled through my fingers as I gripped the spear tightly enough to bend metal. My eyes burned with rage, reflecting the shimmer of the dammed waters churning violently behind the stone barrier. The tyrant stood before me, his heavy breathing echoing through the valley that once knew the gentle music of my river. His hands trembled, not from the dawn's chill, but from the fear that had finally found his heart. "You don't understand what you've done," I murmured, my voice carrying the weight of every tear my people had shed. "You didn't just dam the waters, you damned life itself." In that moment, with my spear raised and the fate of thousands hinging on my next move, I was more than Oba, the river warrior. I was justice itself, embodied in flesh and bone, ready to restore the balance that had been cruelly shattered. My name is Oba, and this is the story of how I became the guardian of flowing waters and unyielding justice. When people call upon me today, they see the crowned Orisha, the warrior who never backs down from injustice. But it wasn't always so. There was a time when I was just a girl dancing on the riverbanks, unaware of the power coursing through my veins as the waters flowed through my sacred land. It was a time of peace in our lands. The river that gave me life wound freely and abundantly, nourishing green fields and sustaining entire communities. I spent my days immersed in its crystal waters, feeling every current, every stone in its bed, every fish swimming in my domain. The river wasn't just my home, it was part of me, and I was part of it. When it rained, I felt every drop that fell on its surface. When the sun warmed its waters, that warmth also warmed my heart. In those days of innocence, I didn't understand why the elders looked at me with a mix of reverence and concern. I didn't grasp why they whispered among themselves when I showed strength beyond the ordinary, or when the waters seemed to obey my unconscious gestures. To me, it was natural that fish would approach when I extended my hand, or that the currents would calm when I entered the river during storms. I was happy in my simplicity, believing that tranquil life would last forever. How wrong I was. The change began subtly, like a shadow stretching slowly at dusk. First came reports from travelers from distant lands, speaking of a man who called himself the Lord of the Waters. They told stories of rivers diverted, dams built, and entire communities forced to abandon their ancestral lands. I listened to these tales with a heavy heart, but they felt distant, like haunted legends told around a fire. Then came the refugees. First a few, then dozens, then hundreds. Emaciated people with hollow eyes and stories of despair. They spoke of a tyrant who had come to their lands with promises of progress and prosperity, but brought only desolation. He dammed the rivers, diverted the waters for his own purposes, and anyone who dared question his methods simply disappeared. I saw the suffering etched on every face, felt the pain in every word they spoke, yet a part of me refused to believe such cruelty could exist. How could someone be so heartless as to deprive a people of their life source? How could someone look at thirsty children and choose to keep the water for themselves? My naivety was brutally shattered one morning that began like any other. I was on the riverbank, watching the sunrise paint the waters gold, when I heard a sound I'd never forget. It was the sound of machines, of metal against stone, of shouted commands. My heart raced and I ran toward the noise, dreading what I might find. What I saw that day changed everything in me. Dozens of armed men worked frantically, piling massive rocks in the bed of my river. They were building a dam, blocking the flow of waters that had run free for millennia. And overseeing it all was him, the tyrant I'd heard so many stories about, but now saw with my own eyes. He was a man of average stature, but his presence dominated the entire scene. His eyes were cold as ice, and a cruel smile played on his lips as he watched the waters being slowly strangled. He wore fine clothes that contrasted with the brutality of his actions, and he carried a golden cane he used to point and give orders. "Faster!" he shouted to the workers. "I want not a drop to flow to the southern lands by tomorrow." I stepped closer, trying to contain the fury growing in my chest like a storm. "What do you think you're doing?" I shouted, my voice echoing through the valley. The tyrant turned slowly, his eyes assessing me with disdain. "Ah, we have a spectator," he said, his tone laced with mockery. "Don't worry, girl. When we're done here, you'll have enough water to drink. For a price, of course." "These waters don't belong to you," I retorted, feeling something ancient and powerful awaken within me. "They belong to every living being that depends on them." He laughed, a harsh, unpleasant sound. "They belong to whoever has the power to control them. And that someone is me." He waved his cane, and immediately I was surrounded by his armed men. "Now I suggest you go home and forget what you saw here. It'd be a shame if something happened to such a fiery young woman." In that moment, with weapons pointed at me and the river being choked before my eyes, I felt something break inside me. It wasn't just anger. It was a profound understanding of who I truly was and what I was born to do. The waters behind the dam began to churn violently as if responding to my growing rage. I could feel the desperation of the trapped fish, the agony of the plants beginning to wilt, the silent cry of the earth itself. But more than that, I could feel the awakening of something within me that had lain dormant my entire life. "You don't know who you're dealing with," I said, my voice now carrying an authority I didn't even know I possessed. The tyrant laughed again, but this time his laugh seemed a little forced. "And who do you think you are, girl?" I looked at him, then at the dammed waters, and finally at my own reflection in the turbulent surface. And in that reflection, for the first time, I saw not just a frightened girl, but the warrior I was destined to become. "I am Oba," I said, and as I spoke my name, it felt like I was proclaiming a fundamental truth of the universe. "And these are my waters." Dear listeners, I know many of you have faced moments when you felt small in the face of injustice, when you had to discover strengths you didn't know you had. The journey of self-discovery is never easy, but it is always necessary. Stay with me, for the true fight is yet to come, and with it, the deepest lessons about courage, justice, and the power we all carry within us. The words left my mouth like a decree from the Orishas themselves, and the moment I spoke them, everything changed. The air around me vibrated with an energy I had never felt before, but which I instantly recognized as part of me. It was as if an ancestral door had opened in my soul, releasing centuries of wisdom and power that had been waiting for the right moment to manifest. The armed men stepped back instinctively, their faces reflecting a confusion that mirrored my own, but the tyrant stood firm, though I could see a shadow of uncertainty cross his cold eyes. "Brave words for someone surrounded by my weapons," he said, but his voice had lost some of its earlier confidence. I smiled, and it was a smile that carried all the ferocity of an approaching storm. "Your weapons cannot harm the waters, and I am the waters." I raised my right hand toward the dammed river, and I felt the connection form, as if I were touching an invisible thread linking me to every drop of that water. The river answered my call with a fury that surprised even me. The waters rose behind the makeshift barrier, forming a liquid wall that gleamed in the morning light. The workers dropped their tools and fled, their cries of terror echoing through the valley. Some of the soldiers hesitated, glancing nervously between me and their leader. But the tyrant, though visibly shaken, did not back down. "Tricks!" he shouted, raising his golden cane. "Nothing but cheap tricks!" But I could see the fear in his eyes, and that fear gave me the confirmation I needed. He knew exactly what I was, even if I was only just discovering it myself. "If they're tricks," I said, my voice now charged with the power of the currents, "then challenge me to prove them." In that moment, I understood that my journey would not just be about freeing the waters. It would be about understanding who I truly was and embracing the responsibility that came with that awakening. The power coursing through me was immense, but also terrifying. It was like holding a lightning bolt in my hands, knowing a wrong move could bring destruction instead of justice. The tyrant signaled to his remaining men, who formed a semicircle around me, but I felt no fear. Instead, I felt a deep calm, like the serenity of deep waters before a great tide. "You don't understand what you're fighting against," he said, his voice now laced with a darker menace. "I am not just a man. I represent a greater force, an order that will bring prosperity to these lands." "Prosperity for whom?" I shot back. "For you and your allies while my people die of thirst? Progress always demands sacrifices," he replied coldly. "The weak must serve the strong. It's the law of nature." His words ignited a fury in me I didn't know I was capable of feeling. It wasn't just personal anger. It was the indignation of generations of the oppressed, the outcry of all the voices silenced by injustice. I felt the river behind me respond to my emotion, its waters churning with a violence that made the earth itself tremble. "The law of nature," I said, "is that the waters must flow freely, not serve the whims of tyrants." It was then that he did something that caught me completely off guard. He laughed, not the cruel laugh from before, but a genuine laugh, as if he had just understood a particularly funny joke. "You still haven't figured it out, have you?" he said, his words dripping with malice that sent a chill down my spine. "You think you're the only one with special powers here?" Before I could react, he raised his golden cane and spoke words in a language I didn't recognize, but which made my soul vibrate with an uncomfortable frequency. The air around us began to ripple like water, and I felt a strange pressure building in my chest. Suddenly, I understood with absolute horror what was happening. He was not just an ordinary tyrant. He had powers, too. Powers drawn from a source I instinctively recognized as corrupt and unnatural. It was as if he had made a pact with dark forces, trading his humanity for control over the elements. "Now you're beginning to understand," he said, smiling as his cane pulsed with a sickly golden light. "I didn't come here by chance. I came because I knew you would eventually awaken, and when you did, I'd be here to reap the fruits of your power." My mind raced, trying to process the revelation. It had all been a trap from the start. He hadn't dammed my river out of greed or cruelty, at least not only for those reasons. He had done it to force me to awaken, to make me reveal my true nature. "You used my people as bait," I whispered, the realization crashing over me like a crushing weight. "Necessary sacrifices," he said indifferently. "But don't worry. Once I've absorbed your power, I'll give them enough water to survive. After all, dead slaves aren't useful." The word absorb hit me like a punch to the gut. He didn't just want to defeat me, he wanted to drain my power, make it his own. And from the knowledge awakening in my ancestral mind, I knew this was possible. There were ancient forbidden magics that allowed the transfer of power from one being to another. But there was something he didn't know, something I was only beginning to understand myself. The power of the Orishas cannot simply be stolen. It must be earned, through trials that test not just strength but character. "You can try," I said, feeling a new resolve settle in my heart. "But you'll find that stealing an Orisha's power is far different from dominating defenseless humans." He raised his cane, and I felt an invisible force try to wrap around me like spectral ropes. It was a nauseating sensation, as if something were trying to tear pieces of my soul. I fought against the force, but found it stronger than I had anticipated. "Stop resisting," he said, his voice now echoing with a supernatural quality. "The more you fight, the more painful it will be." But I couldn't stop fighting, not just for myself, but for all the people who depended on the waters of my river, for all the children dying of thirst while this monster toyed with powers he didn't understand. It was in that moment of desperation that I heard a voice, not with my ears, but directly in my soul. It was a female voice, ancient and powerful, laden with the wisdom of ages. "Daughter of the waters," the voice whispered, "you do not fight alone. Remember who you are. Remember what you stand for." And suddenly, I remembered. They weren't just personal memories, but ancestral ones. Knowledge passed down through generations of warriors like me. I saw other women who had faced similar tyrants, who had fought for justice when no one else could or would. I was Oba, the river warrior, the protector of the oppressed, the force that rises when injustice threatens to prevail. And with that understanding came a power that didn't come from me alone, but from all the women who had fought before me and all those who would fight after. The tyrant must have sensed the shift, because his confident demeanor began to falter. The spectral ropes binding me began to unravel, and I felt my strength returning like a rising tide. "Impossible," he muttered, intensifying his efforts. "You cannot resist my power." "Your power," I said, my voice now carrying an authority drawn from centuries of tradition and struggle, "is built on theft and oppression. Mine comes from love and protection, and love will always be stronger than hate." With those words, I broke his spectral bonds completely and felt my power expand like never before. It wasn't just power over the waters. It was the power of justice personified, the strength that protects the weak and challenges tyrants. The river behind me roared like a beast awakening from a long slumber, and I knew the true confrontation was only beginning. Friends who join me on this journey, how often do we find ourselves bound by the invisible chains of injustice, feeling our powers are insufficient against the forces that oppress us? But remember, true strength doesn't come from the ability to dominate others, but from the courage to stand up for what is right. The final battle awaits us, and with it, the full revelation of what it truly means to bear the responsibility of justice. The roar of the waters echoed through the valley like the war cry of 1,000 warriors, and I felt every fiber of my being vibrate in harmony with that primal force. The tyrant took a step back, his golden cane trembling in his hands, but his eyes still gleamed with a malevolent determination that told me he wouldn't give up easily. "You may have broken my bonds," he hissed, "but you still don't comprehend the true extent of my power." He raised his cane to the sky and began chanting words in a dark language that made the very air feel heavier. The sky above us darkened, as if black clouds were forming from nothing, and I felt an unnatural cold spread through the valley. It was then that I understood the true magnitude of the battle I was fighting. It wasn't just a clash between two powerful beings. It was a confrontation between two fundamentally opposing philosophies about what it means to have power and how to use it. He represented domination, control through fear and brute force. I represented protection, the strength that arises from love and responsibility, for those who cannot defend themselves. As he continued his dark chants, I closed my eyes and connected deeply with the waters around me, not just with the dammed river, but with every spring, every stream, every drop of rain that had fallen on this sacred land. I felt the pain of the trapped waters, the agony of the artificial drought he had created, but I also felt something more, the unyielding hope that justice would prevail. "Ancestral waters," I whispered, "lend me your strength, not to destroy but to liberate, not to conquer but to protect." The response was immediate and overwhelming. I felt the power of all the region's waters flowing through me, not as an external force I controlled, but as an integral part of my own being. I wasn't just Oba commanding the waters. I was the waters themselves, giving form to the will of justice. The tyrant completed his ritual and pointed his cane at me. A bolt of black energy shot from it, aiming for my heart, but I was ready. I raised my hand, and a shield of crystalline water materialized before me, absorbing the attack completely. "Impossible!" he shouted, his composure finally shattering. "My power comes from the very primal forces of ambition and dominion. And mine," I replied, feeling a deep serenity envelop me like a cloak, "comes from unconditional love for those I protect." I extended both hands toward the dam, and I felt every stone, every obstacle blocking the natural flow of the waters. With a fluid motion, like an ancestral dance my body instinctively knew, I began to dismantle the structure. Not with brute violence, but with the persistent patience of water that, drop by drop, can carve mountains. The tyrant realized what I was doing and attacked again, this time summoning not just bolts of energy, but spectral creatures that emerged from his cane, shadows with vaguely human forms, but warped by malice and hatred. The creatures lunged at me with supernatural fury, their spectral claws seeking to tear not just my flesh, but my very spiritual essence. For a moment I felt fear, not of dying, but of failing those who depended on me. But then I remembered the words of the ancestral voice, "You do not fight alone." Fight? And suddenly, I wasn't alone. I felt the presence of other Orishas at my side, warriors who had faced similar battles, protectors who understood the weight of the responsibility we bore. They didn't fight for me, but they lent me their strength, their wisdom, their unyielding determination. With that combined strength, I created not just shields of water, but liquid spears that pierced the spectral creatures like light through shadows. They dissolved with shrill cries that echoed through the valley, and the tyrant staggered as if each of his creatures had been a part of him. "You cannot defeat me!" he roared, but now his voice carried more desperation than confidence. "I sacrificed everything for power, my humanity, my soul, everything. And that's exactly why," I said, feeling tears of compassion roll down my face. "You will never understand true strength." He launched one final desperate attack, channeling all his remaining energy into a single devastating blow. The cane in his hands began to crack under the pressure of the power he was trying to wield, and I realized he was literally burning his own life essence to destroy me. I could have dodged, could have shielded myself and let him consume himself in his own hatred. But in that moment, seeing the pain and emptiness in his eyes, I understood something fundamental about what it meant to be a true warrior of justice. Instead of fleeing, I threw myself directly into his attack, not to fight it with force, but to absorb it, to take upon myself all the pain and hatred he had accumulated. The impact was devastating. It felt like thousands of knives were slicing through my soul, as if all the suffering he had caused was being poured into me at once. But I held on. I held on because I knew that on the other side of that pain was liberation, not just of the waters, but of him as well. When the energy finally dissipated, he fell to his knees, his cane shattered in pieces beside him. He looked at me with an expression of utter confusion, as if seeing the world clearly for the first time in years. "Why?" he whispered. "Why didn't you kill me when you had the chance?" I approached him slowly, extending my hand. "Because true justice isn't about punishment," I said. "It's about restoration. It's about giving every being a chance to choose who they want to be." He looked at my outstretched hand, then at the waters now flowing freely again, and finally back at my face. And for the first time since I'd met him, I saw not the cruel tyrant, but the man he had been before he chose the path of domination. I don't remember who I was before," he said, his voice broken. "It's been so long." "Then find out again," I replied. "Water always finds its way back to the source. Maybe you can too." He hesitated for a long moment, then slowly reached out and touched my hand. At the moment of contact, I felt a wave of all the emotions he had suppressed. Remorse, pain, a desperate longing for redemption he had buried under layers of corrupt ambition. It wasn't a simple ending. He didn't instantly transform into a good man, and I knew it would take a long time, perhaps the rest of his life, for him to truly atone for the evils he had caused. But the important thing was that now he had a choice, an opportunity to start anew. With the tyrant defeated and the waters flowing freely once more, I turned to gaze at my restored river. It was more beautiful than I remembered. Its crystalline waters reflected the returned blue sky, and I could see fish leaping joyfully in its renewed currents. But the true reward came when I saw the people arriving. First were the refugees who had been driven from their lands, running toward the waters with tears of joy in their eyes. Then came the locals, bringing containers to collect the precious water that had been denied them for so long. I saw children playing on the banks for the first time in months, mothers filling jars while whispering prayers of gratitude, elders kneeling to touch the water with trembling hands. And in each of those moments I felt my heart expand with a joy I had never known. But then something extraordinary happened. One of the elders approached me, carrying something in her hands. It was a crown, not made of gold or precious stones, but woven from river reeds and adorned with flowers that grew on its banks. "For you, O Ba," she said, her voice filled with reverence, "the warrior who gave us back our life." I wanted to protest, to say I had only done what anyone would do when faced with injustice. But then I understood that accepting the crown wasn't about vanity or personal recognition. It was about publicly embracing the responsibility that came with my power, the commitment to always be there when my people needed protection. When the crown was placed on my head, I felt a final transformation complete. I was no longer just Oba, the girl who danced on the riverbanks. I was Oba, the guardian of the waters, the protector of the oppressed, the force that rises when justice is threatened. But with that power came a profound understanding of its responsibility. I had learned that true strength lies not in dominating others, but in serving those who cannot defend themselves. I had learned that justice is not about vengeance, but about restoration and healing. And most importantly, I had learned that we all carry within us the capacity to be warriors of justice, to rise against oppression, to protect those we love. Years have passed since that day, and my river continues to flow freely and abundantly. The former tyrant, now a simple man working to rebuild the communities he once destroyed, sometimes comes to the banks to meditate and ask forgiveness from the waters. It's a constant reminder that redemption is always possible, even for those who seem to have gone too far. But my true joy comes from the children who now grow up playing freely in the waters, learning from an early age that nature is to be respected and protected, not dominated. They see me not as a distant goddess, but as a present guardian, someone who will always be there when they need me. And when those children grow up and face their own injustices, they will know they carry the same strength that allowed me to stand against the tyrant. They will know that true courage is not the absence of fear, but the decision to act despite it. This is my story, but it is also the story of each of you, because we all have our rivers to protect, our tyrants to face, our crowns of responsibility to accept. And when that moment comes, and it will come, remember that you do not fight alone. The waters of justice flow through us all, and when we unite in common purpose, there is no force in the world that can stop us. I am Oba, and these are my waters. But you too are warriors of the waters of life, and the day will come when you are called to protect what you love. When that day comes, do not hesitate. Rise, fight, and remember that justice always finds a way. Dear companions on this journey, we have reached the end of my story, but not the end of the fight for justice that each of you will wage in your own lives. I hope my journey inspires you to find the courage within yourselves, to stand against injustice wherever you find it, and to always remember that true power comes from love and protection, not domination. Share this story, reflect on it, and, most importantly, live it in your own battles for justice. The waters of life continue to flow, and it is up to each of us to ensure they flow freely for all.